remember, is one in one happening in a school. The SAGE is a system. There's 3 parts to that system. The first part is what we call formative. This is a tool for teachers. This tool has not lived up to its promises. We've got to make some huge improvements or changes with this formative tool. So I'm just telling you flat out, I know it's not what we need. It's not what we thought we were purchasing. We're going to have to make some major changes, improvements with formative. But it's an optional tool just for teachers that want to use it, that find meaning with it. Interim, that's the test that's just like the spring test, but you can give it during the middle of the year. So it's a great opportunity if you want some mid-year information, mid-year results, if you want to see how the kids are learning and progressing towards doing well on that summative test. That interim optional test in the middle of the year can be a great opportunity for students. It's totally up to all of you whether or not kids participate in it. Some districts have chosen to say everybody in our district is going to take the interim. That's okay. Some schools have chosen to say, if their district has it, some schools have said everybody in our school is going to take it. And some teachers who are not being required by the school or district say, hey, I want my kids to take it. So it's a local decision, totally optional. Then we have the summative. That's the spring test. That's the test that we gave for the first time last spring, 2014. It's required. That's the summative test. And as you know, that summative test has 2 parts. Has the computer adaptive part for language arts, math, and science. But there's also a writing portion, 2 writing prompts for every student. Last year, we learned some things, and there were some things that we found had to be improved and changed. And so this year, the test is going to be different, and it will be much improved, the writing portion from last year. And that's happening in February, so just in a couple of weeks, kids are going to start taking that writing test. There is a term being used with summative tests that is really concerning to me. And I hear it every once and again in the literature, hear it around. And that's the idea that the spring test is an autopsy. That term is just so offensive to me, and let me tell you why. I, like a lot of you, have had loved ones, have had school children that for a variety of reasons have ended up passing away and needing an autopsy. That's not a term that I find very friendly at all. Testing is nothing to compare with that horrible experience of losing someone you care about and having them need that kind of service. This spring test is like an annual checkup. How many of you ever go into the doctor for an annual, well, maybe not annual, once every 10 years checkup? What happens with that checkup? That's an opportunity to see how you're doing from a health standpoint. It doesn't change the past. You're not going to change what's happened with your health before that checkup, but it's a great opportunity to change what's going to happen moving forward. That's what an annual checkup does. Our spring summative is an annual checkup. But just like the doctor, he takes all things, whoever you see, takes all things into consideration. You know, all the blood tests, all the chem analyses, all the, blood pressure, all those things to make a diagnosis, to do your checkup. Education is the same. We have so many pieces of great information that all needs to come together, which includes that summative spring SAGE, to really determine how kids are doing and talk about their educational health. So I want to talk about summative SAGE and what value is there in the results. I recently read a book, like last week, that said the results are worthless. Don't even bother. Don't even look at them. What a tragedy. When you think about the money we spend on the test, the time that's spent to administer it, the time students spent to take it, what a tragedy if it was meaningless and we shouldn't even look at it. I don't believe that at all. I believe there is some meaning. And I think there's 4 pieces of meaning. There's meaning to teachers, there's meaning to parents, there's meaning to students, and certainly we can get a lot of. Let's first talk about at the year when teachers get their summative results. Is that so that they can change what's happened to that child? No, it's too late. It's the end of the year. But it's an opportunity for teachers to really reflect on the past year. Now that they see that end of year results, it really gives them that opportunity to reflect back and say, what things did everybody in my class do really well? Was there anything that everybody in my class kind of struggled with? Were there a majority of students that experienced this or that or showed these kinds of results? It's a great opportunity for teachers to reflect back on their teaching experience. Yes?
To that end, Judy, it will have much more utility if it comes closer to the end of the school year than to the middle of the next school year. What are our plans for the future?
I love that. That could have been scripted right out of what I wanted to say. Do you know when that needs to happen? Spring. Spring before everybody goes home for the summer. Because by the time you spent the summer going to Disneyland and mowing your grass and doing all of those things you do, it's a different experience to look at those results in the fall than it is right in the spring when everything you've been doing all year is really fresh. The results will be immediate, so everyone will have them in the spring. And I would hope in the spring, before everybody leaves for the summer, there's that opportunity to really sit down, review not only those results, but all your results, because now you'll have them all for the whole year, and really reflect on that year. So thank you for that comment. What else can teachers do? They can reflect back, but then they can use that information to inform what they're going to do the coming year, particularly if they're teaching the same grade or the same content. What do I need to adjust in my instruction the coming year that will result in a different type of experience for my students to help them do better? So it's a great opportunity, and they'll have, as they, teachers think through the summer about what they're going to be teaching the next year, it's an opportunity to make those kinds of adjustments. Then in the fall, when they get that list of those great kids that are going to be in their classroom that coming year, the summative information from those kids from last spring, that's the most recent piece of data they're going to have, will really help them to decide what they're going to do in the classroom that year, because now they know for every one of those students where did they struggle, what were some missing pieces, how did they do on that spring test. So great information for teachers. Now, one of the reports that the teachers get through this new SAGE system is kind of a comparative piece. So they're able to see the state average scale score, the district average scale score, the school, and their class. So it's a way for teachers to say, well, my class, this is how they did. How did that compare to everybody else in my school? How did that compare to everybody else in my district? How did that compare to the state? Because sometimes, depending upon the school where you teach, you might get kind of a skewed perspective. Wow, my class is the best in this school, but maybe not so well compared to everybody else in the district. So it's a way to put all these results into context, and the report will show that. Then there's another report. I mean, there's lots of reports in this system, but another one is they get the information on each of their students. And so not only can they see how each student performed in all of their what we call sub-scores, but they can put that together as a class. If the majority of your class is struggling in a particular area, that's good to know at the beginning of the year. If only 1 or 2 kids are struggling in a particular area, that's good to know, because then you can make that adjustment in your instruction. Parents, what can parents do with summative? As parents get those individual student results, it's a really great opportunity to learn what their student knows or maybe is struggling in. It's a great way to open up conversation with parents and teachers. What can I do over the summer to help my student be better prepared when class starts in the fall? It's a great opportunity for parents to see.
So what parts of this data are public? Like
Okay, the data that's public is all the aggregate data. So,
aggregate get to a classroom or just aggregate?
not at
to
the
school?
classroom level, it's aggregate at the school level, the district level, and the state level.
That's all. So parents can't say, look and see, compare teachers or.
Well, what parents can do, when they get their individual student report card down in that right-hand corner, it gives the scale score for their district and for the state and for the school. So they can say, okay, if my student got 378, and then you look at the right-hand corner, and I know it's really small, the school average was 344. Oh, my student did better than the school. That's good information for a parent to know. My student did about as well as the school average, or my student was way below the school average.
What about for community councils? I guess, I'm sorry. I've had community councils ask me, well, can we look at the data by classroom, or can we, you know what I mean, when they're trying to do that.
Currently, for the public, we don't do it at the classroom level, because at the classroom level, currently, law protects that because it's part of a teacher's evaluation, and that's a protected piece of information. So, this is an opportunity for parents to learn more about their student, be more involved, and help their student improve. So let's talk about students. We need to support students in owning their own data. Who should know more about the data than the child? They should know what their scores are. If you pass a kid in the hallway, you should be able to ask them and say, how did you do on stage last spring? What was your language arts score? They should be able to know that. Not that I want you going to school. But kids should know their score. If they say, I have no idea. Well, if they don't know, how can they really engage in learning and improving? Kids should know how they're doing in writing. If they are not attuned to their own scores, to their own information, it's really difficult to get them excited to learn. You know, years and years ago, we used to have this idea that you don't want kids to feel bad. You know, you don't want them to be embarrassed, so don't really tell them what's going on. I mean, you know, that's an old thing from years ago. Sometimes it's hard. Years ago, when I was at an alternative school, and we had kids, you know, I had 10th graders reading on a 4th grade level. Well, they needed to know that. Even though that was kind of embarrassing and hurtful to find out, they needed to know that. And it was an interesting process as we shared with them, and Martin knows all about this, he lived that when I did. When they discovered, really, I can't read, then they became engaged in improving that reading, and they became excited to see their reading improve. It's amazing what happened, but they had to know, they had to own their own reading. Okay, let's talk about growth for a minute. Growth, there's two ways to look at growth. The first way is a trend line. That's where you compare scores every spring. Do we have a trend line yet? No, we don't have that. We only have 1 year of stage data. We don't have a trend line. But this spring, coming up pretty soon, a couple of months, we'll start that trend line, and we'll have 2 years of data for every student, and that will be really exciting. That will be very helpful. The other kind of growth we have is student growth percentage. That's an opportunity where you compare students with kids that perform exactly like them academically, and then see the next year how much they grew compared to kids that perform the same as them academically. Student growth percentiles, and we'll be continuing to use those. So at the bottom of our SAGE student report is the trend line. And this year, it looked pretty stupid. There's one little point. But we put it there because it's an important piece of data. And if a student has had an interim test, some of our students have already taken interim, some of them will be taking them in the next couple of months, then they have 2 points on this trend line. And then, of course, with the spring summative SAGE, then they'll be adding a point. So that trend line for each student will slowly start to build. And then, of course, student growth percentiles is an opportunity to project forward the type of growth that students should be exhibiting. It's a way to set goals. It's a way to look at growth. I'll be honest with you, growth makes me very nervous. And the thing that makes me very nervous about it is you have to make sure that it's an honest reflection of real growth. And I'm very nervous about this with SAGE, and I'm going to be watching this very closely. I don't want our growth to be a manufacture of the test. I don't want our growth to suggest kids are growing at greater rates than it's really happening. And I also don't want the opposite. I don't want kids growing and improving and our growth doesn't reflect that. So we're going to have to watch that closely, really look at the data, make sure that the way we're measuring growth is accurate. So I need to talk about results. I want to talk about what we know. I want to talk about what we still have to learn. So how long is SAGE results? Give or take, Christmas and all that stuff. So I'm not coming with lots of great analyses. I'll just tell you
Was there
that.
any tests done on the SAGE program before it was implemented? Were there tests done to give you like a baseline? If you use this grading program, it'll give you these results in so many years? Any of that done? Any information on that?
No, that was not done.
So just a test that was implemented and we're trying to find out now what it's going to tell us.
Well,
We
what
don't
it,
know anything before.
the way that we implemented SAGE as a new test, which is similar to how all new tests are implemented across the country, is you use all of those analyses as a function of constructing the test, but then it's after it's implemented that you're able to put all that aggregate information to do some of those additional analyses. So did we go into it with no analyses? No, that's not true, but the analyses were more based on a function of creating the test, not based on results, because you can't have results till
Trying it out on some test classrooms or something. No, that
yeah,
was
we
not-
didn't do those kinds of pilots for this. And that's why last year was unique, because it was what we call an operational field test, which allowed us to only have students take one test instead of forcing them to double test, which would have doubled the testing time in all of the classrooms.
Now there is a group, is it AIR?
AIR is the vendor that we have contracted with.
Okay, so when you say a Utah build, you mean that you're using this outside source to coordinate what Utah wants, or how would you depict that?
Okay, let me explain how that works. The test is developed by Utah educators under the, what would you call it, purview of the state office. What AIR provides, the reason we have the contract with them, is I do not have the staff at the state office to do all of the work that it takes. So for instance, they do a lot of the work of organizing the teacher workshops and making all of the arrangements and taking care of having all of the materials provided. But the materials that they provide are all materials that have been pre-approved by the state office. They also provide a lot of assessment and technical expertise because, as you mentioned, I mean, this is, creating tests is a pretty detailed science. And so there's a lot of statistical work that goes into all of these pieces, and they provide all of that kind of work as well. So they're kind of doing all of the legwork, but all of the decisions, all of the approvals, all of that is closely taken care of by the state office.
Now, am I to understand correctly, because we have this contract with AIR, that they have subsidiary groupings, like 20 some or whatever, to which our data is available because we have contracted with
No,
them?
that is not true. Our contract with AIR is very specific. Utah owns the data, and AIR can only use that data for purposes of working with Utah. It would be against federal law for them to do anything different. So
Are they
it's
a
very.
Utah company?
I'm sorry, what?
Are they a Utah company?
No, they're housed out of Washington.
Why didn't we go to Utah company?
You know, when we put out an RFP for all of the companies to bid on working with this assessment system, the committee that the board appointed to go through all of those proposals, they made the final decision for AIR. So you have to understand, this isn't new. Utah has always contracted with a testing company. We've had a testing company in place since probably, I don't know, before my time, at least as long as I've been at the state office. And depending upon the contract, you have different companies. I've probably worked with 12 to 15 different vendors for different types of assessments. So this is just kind of business as usual that we've always done.
So we wrote all the test items, I mean, like, we wrote all the writing prompts, we wrote all the math prompts, we wrote all of the reading prompts, because
That's correct.
I gave them to my students, and some of those writing prompts were really beyond strange.
They were all written by Utah educators and went through quite an extensive approval process. Utah educators, again, there's like 5 different committees that have to review and look at those items, and it's all Utah based. But, you know, as I mentioned at the beginning, there were some problems with the writing that we have now made some improvements to, and I think you'll see something different. Okay? All right, let's talk about the results.
Question here.
You bet. Oh, I'm sorry.
Do you know the history of the operation here in the first statistics, and how many students in Utah opted out of the position?
You know, we've been looking at that data, and it was less than 2% of students opted out, so it was a very low percentage. Of course, that's statewide, it was less than 2%, but there were some areas that had a heavier concentration. Okay, I am absolutely confident that our scores will improve. And let me tell you why I have such confidence. First off, we've seen that in other states. And I'm not saying scores are suddenly going to take a quick incline. It's going to take time, but I really believe that every year we're going to see some incremental changes. When Kentucky and New York did the same thing we've done, they adopted new standards, they created new assessments. The second year, they saw a slight increase. Not huge increases, slight increases. We've also seen the same thing here in Utah with science and with math. When we first started the CRTs in science, the scores were really low, and as you can see, every year, almost every year, a couple of years it remained flat, there were those slight incremental increases. And I'm sure we're going to see the same thing with SAGE, that as we move forward, that kids will continue to improve and become more proficient. This is an interesting thing. I don't like to talk about CRTs very much because it's in the past, it's old stuff. But I think there's a couple of things that I want to share with you. Let me explain what these charts are. This chart represents student scale scores, and it's the distribution of those scale scores. The purple chart is the CRTs, and the one on the right, the blue chart, is SAGE. As you look at the chart on the left, you'll see a lot of students who scored at the top level, and there's a red circle around it. What happened with CRTs is we had kind of a ceiling effect. We had tons and tons of kids that scored the very highest possible on the CRTs. Because of that, we didn't know much about those kids other than the fact that they aced the test. So what SAGE has done is it has eliminated that ceiling effect. So now, even for our highest performing students, we can see exactly might be two. Exactly. We can see the things that they're learning, the things that they understand, and we don't have that ceiling effect anymore. And I think that's been one of the great advantages of SAGE.
I'm sorry, is that hypothetical though, because we don't have the data? We only have 1 year's worth of data to show that there's been.
Right. That's the score is the proficiency on the students in 2014. That's the data we have for SAGE. and the 2013 CRT score.
Okay.
So that's proficiency data that we have. Just showing you that the ceiling effect that we used to have doesn't exist anymore. All right, I want you to look at this bubble chart and get familiar with it. Every circle is a school. So every school in Utah that has grades 3 through 8 is represented on this chart. Then vertically, it is the proficiency rate. So it's the average proficiency of the school. We're looking at the percent proficient. And then across the bottom is their poverty. We were looking to see if there was a relationship between poverty and proficiency. What would that chart suggest? There is a relationship, isn't there? Now we don't know exactly why and the causes, and there's a lot of questions we need to ask. But we can at least see there appears to be some relationship, okay? So I just want to make sure you kind of understand poverty, proficiency. Now that's language arts. We did the same thing for math. It's similar relationship. So you can get a sense of that. Now, when we looked at CRTs versus SAGE, our schools were more clustered around the top on CRTs, and we loved that because we had really good scores with CRTs. But our ability to differentiate between school performance was quite limited because everybody was more bunched together. With SAGE, it's much more spread out. So based on SAGE results, it's much more possible to differentiate between achievement between schools because they're spread out. So do you see that difference? So SAGE gives us an opportunity to better look at schools, look at differences, look at instruction, look at what's happening at those schools. So then we took that chart and we put it into quadrants, and you've all seen quadrant charts before. So it's the same chart, every bubble is a school. What does quadrant 1 tell us? What's in quadrant 1? It's your high income and higher performing schools, okay? And as we already noted with the relationship, schools that are higher, have higher incomes tend to have higher performance. Okay, look at quadrant 2. What does that tell us? That's kind of interesting. You've still got high income, but you're not seeing the high performance. So that's kind of interesting, isn't it? Those schools that are there. What does quadrant 3 tell us? Yeah, so you're now into the lower incomes, but some schools with some pretty good scores. That's kind of interesting. And then quadrant 4 is the lower income and lower proficiency. So as you look at this chart, would you be interested to know if you have any schools in your district that are in quadrant 3? Yeah, I bet you would like to know. Do we have any schools in quadrant 3? Yeah.
So why did you not find it equally? I mean, you've got across the bottom it's like at 50%, but the proficiency rate went down by 40, so they're not equally divided.
The reason they chose to do that is because the scores are all lower. They were looking more for the mean. Okay. If scores were higher, the mean would be closer to 50%, but it's not in this case for our beginning year. So what do you think, how would you feel if you find out schools in your district are in quadrant 3? You could feel pretty good about that, but it'd also be an opportunity to find out what's going on. Yeah, what's happening in that school that causes them to be in quadrant 3. Now, I would dare guess that a lot of those schools are Title I schools with some pretty good financial resources for them. That's what I would expect. But we'd have to get into the data, wouldn't we, and find out who are those schools, what are those schools? Because I don't think all of those, there's too many circles for those to only be the Title I schools with big bucks. Okay, look at quadrant 2. Are you curious to know if you have schools in your district in quadrant 2? Yeah. That would be an opportunity to learn more about that school. Now, one of the things you have to be really careful with data is sometimes we jump to quick judgments or quick assumptions. And I would really caution you with that. And I know you guys look at data all the time. This isn't anything new. But I just caution you, every time you look at data, don't be too quick to jump to your assumption or a judgment. Use it as an opportunity to ask more questions. What's happening in those quadrant 2 schools? Getting more information. This is just an opportunity to start getting more information and learning more. To kind of help you. It's interesting, isn't it? This is kind of interesting. This is comparing all our schools with charter schools. What does this tell you? In fact, they're almost amazingly the same. I wouldn't have expected them to be so absolutely similar.
Why not?
Why wouldn't I?
Yeah.
Well, the premise behind charters is for them to do things very, very differently than a regular public school. And so the whole premise is this is an opportunity to explore other ways of providing education, other ways of working with students, unique opportunities. So it's just interesting based on the premise that supposedly they're very, very different, that the results would be almost identical. That's
What
what
are
I'm
most
basing
of the charter
it on.
schools fall?
I'm sorry, what?
On your other chart, what are the most of the charter schools fall? Quadrant 1, quadrant 2?
Well, if you looked at this, you could kind of, you know, the line was drawn what, about here and about here. So they're kind of, distribution is similar. You know, I am so happy to provide any information I can to whoever would like to see. Just interesting. Talk about moving forward. I'd like to share with you some things that I'm now focused around. My job has now drastically changed, and I'm going to be doing some very different things. Not so different, but I'm now allowed to emphasize some things I haven't been able to. These 4 areas are things that I think are really important that I want to focus on. This isn't anything new. This is things you're already doing, that's already happening in your schools and districts. This is about collaborative school improvement. And I want to talk about each of these areas just a little bit. The first one is focused leadership. You know, as you all know, that school principal makes a huge difference. That school principal is absolutely essential in school improvement and school collaboration. But it also takes strong district leadership and state leadership. And I think one of the biggest things that we're changing as we move forward beginning in 2015 is the state is going to start doing what you guys have already been doing and show leadership in this area of working with data. You know, in the past, we've done a few things. Some of you may be aware, several years ago, I ran a Principals Data Institute. We did that for a couple of years. It was pretty successful. We've done a few other things, but we've always had, it's always been trying to carve money out of a budget where money didn't exist and trying to do things on a small scale. It's been a little more cherry picking than I think has been in our best interest. So I think moving forward, beginning in 2015, my role now is to have my attention completely focused more on data issues. And I'm hoping that will make a difference from the state focus. Relevant data. As I mentioned in the beginning, it's not just about SAGE. There's so much rich data at the school that we've got to continue to focus on all of it and bring it all together so we form a holistic picture. Performance indicators. There's so much rich information that you don't get out of a test. So many things that teachers learn and are aware of as they work with kids. And then this whole idea of accessibility. We have huge improvements to make. And I'm taking this as kind of a personal charge to me. We've got to improve our data systems. You've got to access data more quickly, more easily, and in a much more friendly format. We've got to do a better job with that, and that's something we're really going to be focused around moving forward. Targeted professional learning, and this is why I just loved what Martin said a while ago. Starts in the spring, at the end of the school year, while everybody still knows and cares and remembers what happened during the year. Really sitting down and focusing on that data for the year and really looking at it with an eye of what can we learn from this? What can we do with all this rich information? Because I know we're all, what do they call it, data rich and information poor. We have tons of data. Really putting it together and saying, okay, before we officially end the year and everybody goes off to Disneyland or whatever we do, what can we learn about the year that just ended while everybody's fresh and they remember? Yes.
My question is, shouldn't we be able to do that? I know many of our schools, well, all of our schools are doing that mid-year assessment. If it's immediate feedback on it, shouldn't our educators be able to sit down, look at where they're missing information, and be able to do that during this year while they still have those students? Isn't that the goal?
Definitely. These conversations of looking at data